Can we spend a little time unpacking your testimony? I I have gotten the sense that like your faith seems to get stronger and stronger every year, every day. Um, but I'd love to hear kind of how that started for you and how that's kind of matured, especially over the last couple of years.
Yeah, when you look at the purpose of our lives all the way back from when we can remember, when you truly recognize that God is working in your life, when you actually have that like moment of, oh, okay, this has been working this entire time, whatever challenges have we been through as a kid in our careers, all of the obstacles that we've been through, all the adversity we've been through, we realize that it was for who we are today, right? Everybody can say that, recognize it because it is true. And I
Hmm.
think looking back for me is like I've always had, a level of faith on my heart, but I never truly recognized who God was. And you have an idea, you have like a rough concept. Everybody has this rough concept, but it's kind of like me being Catholic. When I go out there and I really pour my heart out into my faith, I recognize these other elements of our faith, but I'm always kind of interested in why people don't ever commit wholeheartedly because they have an idea of what they think it is, but then they don't ever commit. They don't have, there's something about it that keeps them from fully experiencing the beauty that comes from any of these decisions. It could be a career or something else, but we have a commitment problem essentially. But I never committed. I never
Hmm.
really, I never took it seriously, and I never looked at God that way until I had these experiences where I lost my mother, the helo went down. I've got this story like in detail because I could go very, very deep into this, but
Yeah.
I went to high levels of intensity in my career at Dev Group. I really experienced the fullness of physical, spiritual, mental engagement. I was pressing as hard as I knew how in all different directions. So I'm testing myself. I'm getting tested from all different elements. One of the moments that I speak of often is when I was home taking care of my mother, not on deployment with those guys that were overseas. We were spread out all over the place. And I try to tell people like two troopers over here, I would have been in another troop. And
Hmm.
I was home though, taking care of my mom. And so when the helo went down, eventually, I was in the team room while going back and forth with trying to, do the best I could for my mother. But they didn't know that I was in that squadron. And so what
Yeah.
happened was when I was recalled, I took a drive into work trying to figure out, wrap my head around what was going on. All I know is as I got recalled, and when I was sitting there, everybody was scrambling. It was like this chaotic scene that you'll never be able to really fully understand or recreate.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting at the table just staring at the wall of all the names that are up there, and I'm just still, and it just feels like everything's buzzing around me. And somebody just comes up to me and is like, "Hey, you need to figure out." I was in a space of like they said, "Hey, if somebody's in knows anybody in gold, then sit here." Right. And
Hmm.
so I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna just walk in here like a zombie and sit down. And somebody came up and slapped that paper in front of me. I was like, hey, you need to figure out who you're gonna go notify in a very matter of fact manner of like, we just got to get it done. And so when that happened, it's like time froze still. And I'm
Hmm.
staring at this list of all these men that I trained with, fought with, slept with, ate with, and everything. I mean, these men that I just knew, with all my heart. And I'm staring at this list like, what did you just ask me? Did you just ask me to pick a name? And I sat there and I don't know if a minute went
Man.
by or 30, but it was like somebody had to kind of snap me out of it, like, hey, what are you going to do, or how can you help, type thing.
Man.
And I don't know if I like leaned over to somebody next to me and kind of like tried to explain that I was like, hey, these are my guys. Like I obviously knew some and worked with some and trained with some more intently than others, but it was a paralyzing thing. That was almost like I had to have somebody tell me what to do. You know what I
Man,
mean?
I
Like,
just froze.
just pick somebody for me because I don't want to make that decision right now.
Hmm.
I wasn't even in a state to process that. So during this time, the reason I bring that up is because God permitted this moment for me in my life, and it was so intense, and it was so just overwhelming that began the journey of, then my mom passed away shortly after that. Then I had to go home and bury her. Then I was going to funerals every day. I mean, there was a point, I think maybe 10 days straight, where it was back to back to back. They knew they had to set up the funerals that way so we could make it to as many as we could. So I was on a
Unreal.
flight, out to Maui, and then getting on a flight back and going to Tennessee. I was doing everything I can to jump on a plane, a bus, jump in a cop car, a taxi, an Uber, whatever. Like, I had to make the timelines as much as I could, and there were some that I couldn't make.
Mm.
But I was in this whirlwind of funeral after funeral, and I'm going to all these churches, and I'm going to all these families, and I'm experiencing all of this loss, this deep loss. And I remember going up into Arlington, which is where they had one funeral for 13 guys. And that was where we had a chunk of them. So they still had some memorial services, but they still had the funeral there. And I was walking up there, and I just remember asking myself, like, why, God? Like, why is this happening? And what is my purpose now that I've been shown this? Like, what do you want me to do with this? Because you're left, and I think anybody could say that they've experienced some level of this in their life where they're shown something like this. And that intensity for me could have been the same intensity somebody feels with some other circumstance in their life. It's the way that we're built, it's the way that we're going through life on our different journey, but it doesn't mean the intensity is any different. And it
Hmm.
just was that moment for me to kind of look to the sky and be like, what do you want me to take away from this? What am I supposed to be doing to honor these guys' life, to understand our existence of what we're doing here? Because you question everything. Everything's in
Hmm.
play at that point. And so I think that sparked something in me. And it was a matter of also just being in these churches and being in these families and being in these settings in such an intent, high pace, that I really deeply asked the question, like, what is the connection to all this and what am I supposed to do with it? And that led me down a road of a slow journey of going back to the church. And
Mm.
everything about what I've done has felt absolutely right. Like, everything, every step that I've leaned into it to be like, you know what, I've talked about this before. Baptizing my children was very, very important to me. For some reason on my heart, it was always just something that I knew that was right and true. And so
Mm.
when I started to follow through with that, I went back to the church and I said, hey, and if I were to recreate my mental attitude, I'd be like, hey, what's going on here? Like, I want to baptize my son. Like, can we just high five and like make this happen? Sounds really cool. I know I need to do it. And that is what I appreciate about the beauty of the church so much, is that we always talk about holding the line. And we actually,
Hmm.
when we start talking about doing that, like, well, what's the line and what are we actually holding? Well, when we unpack that, the church has been holding the line of these standards that have been created since Christ walked this earth. And that's the beauty of all that have unfolded right in front of my very eyes, because I was like, hey, well, I want to baptize my son. And they're like, well, you're not married in the Catholic Church. And for me, it was this moment of recognizing all of the truths. And believe me, I've heard all kinds of stories. We've all got different backgrounds and understandings, and there's going to be a lot of people that listen to this that can relate to what I'm saying, both on the
Sure.
side of not understanding and the side of understanding. But ultimately, it was recognizing that it was because of that line that was kept this entire time that I was being put in a position where I actually had to confront who I was and what I
Mm.
did. And
Yeah.
so, knowing that, I was put in that position to be like, wow, okay, there is a standard here that somebody is keeping, and it might be imperfect. It might be
Mm.
an imperfect way, but we struggle as men on this earth to go through that process. And it was very, very superficial for me at that point, but it was a deep cut to the heart to recognize that something was off about the way I was living.
A
I wasn't
standard.
able to go and baptize my son wholeheartedly in a way that seemed in alignment with where I should have been. And that was absolutely the truth. So I walked out of there like, wow, I have a lot to change in my life, and I have
Mm.
a lot to fix. And so as I unpacked that day in, day out, confronting through some prayer, I actually just talked to my buddy Brad Haynes last night. We were at a party at the NRA show, and what is it? John Rich, I think,
Yep.
one of
Yep.
the country singers, where I
Yep.
went to one of his houses and doing a concert. And this guy, Brad Haynes, came up to me, just met this guy, and all of a sudden we're in the midst of this huge party, and he starts talking about God. And it was like this spark of, he sent me a Bible, he sent me some things about how to pray, and this is around, the time after that. And so all this stuff starts to unfold, and God is just sending these ways to form my heart, like he does with all of
Mm-hmm.
us.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the progression that slowly started to work on my heart. But I saw that it was good and I saw that it was true. So I leaned into it instead of running away, which I think is a key thing about redeeming men and giving men what they need to truly become who God's calling them to be, is to get rid of all of the things that are holding us back to doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's everything from hanging around with the wrong people and drinking and focusing on the wrong stuff and porn and everything that we know that distracts us and pulls us away from reality, the reality of who we could be. And I'm getting goosebumps right now because I think back, I'm like, if I had the heart that I had now and the level of faith going into the teams, I have
Yeah.
no idea what I would have been able to accomplish. I mean, it would have been, I wouldn't even have been the same person.
Yeah.
Would have reached such higher levels without pulling myself away in all these different facets. So I
Mm-hmm.
say that, and try to compress that journey down, but it's pretty much led me to where I am today, which is an unwavering and relentless pursuit of who God's calling me to be each and every day. And as much as I've been out there in media, it's been a continuing pull away from that, to be like, okay, every bit of what I have going on, like, this is awesome because I love what you guys do. I love what you stand for. We get to talk about faith, and we have a small network of people, but ultimately, like, it's got to be strategic because we can waste our life away sitting here on the phone, just, doing this all day long. And it's
Yeah.
an extreme threat. It's an extreme threat.